All right, thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you for your patience. We were running a little bit late, so we are a little bit late getting started today, but I wanted to welcome everyone and thank everyone for joining us today, and also for all of the work that you do to help make homelessness rare, brief, and one time in Anchorage and around our state. To start us off with a land acknowledgement, I'd like to invite Charles Gorman to lead us through that.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is our land acknowledgement. The Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness and the HPRS Advisory Council would like to acknowledge that we gather today on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina Athabascans. For thousands of years, the Dena'ina have been and continue to be the stewards of this land. It is with gratefulness and respect that we recognize the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspectives of the Upper Cook Inlet Dena'ina.
Thank you so much. Roger Bronson had a mission moment for us today.
Yes, thank you. I got called away and just got back to the computer, but my mission moment today is just a recognition and a call for continued collaboration amongst us partners and the folks who are interacting with the homeless community and the rest of the community, that we not let what's happening at the city level, we let those people make the decisions that they need to make, and we just continue to work with each other and not allow that to become a distraction. So I so appreciate the collaborative effort we put into this as a community, and that it will continue regardless of how the upper management figures out their affairs. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. I want to give a brief update on the work session that we just had and the work that has been happening over the last month. We have been working with a small work session group to talk about the potential for a designated camp here in Anchorage, and that work is ongoing and has the participation of quite a few counselors working together to build a work plan and talk about how some of that work might move forward. The advisory council committees continue to meet monthly or bi-monthly, and have been focusing over the past month on some of the governance documents and compliance documents, both for the advisory council and the AKHMIS work. And we did have some action items to approve some updates to those documents at the work session that all passed. The Community Prioritization Committee is looking forward to getting started and back into their work with Anchored Home and looking at some of those pieces and picking that work back up starting this upcoming month. All right, I will hand off to, I believe we have Celia today to give the ACH update.
Thank you all for letting me step into Meg's shoes momentarily. I am first and foremost very excited to say that Meg will be back starting next week. So you can look forward to perhaps some variety in who's coming to help talk about this section of things very soon. I have some very random notes. So the first thing to talk about is, as far as I've been made aware, the guest house purchase sale agreement has gone through or is in the process of going through. So that's something to be celebrated by the community as we bring online more resources to help our homeless community members. Intakes are happening on Fridays at the guest house, and that program's being run by 99+1 with a little bit of technical assistance through the coalition. The coalition has also is working very furiously on our ARPA grants and submitting those as soon as possible. We hope to be able to leverage those funds to better serve the community. There's also an outstanding request that seems like it'll be brought in June to do $1 million in funding for community outreach. Most of that's going to get passed through. The coalition's requesting it, and we're going to pass through the funds to partners who've lost funding. Sounds like there was an opportunity the other day for Ryan Chernikoff, who's our transition coordinator, to speak on the importance of outreach. Those are my main updates. My understanding is the facilitation packet was also sent out, so most of the facilitation updates should be in that. Are there any questions I can attempt to answer at this time?
I am not seeing any questions in the chat or any hands raised. If anyone's not able to type in the chat or raise their hand, please feel free to unmute and just ask any questions if you have any questions for Celia. All right, well, thank you so much, Celia. Moving on, we have a special presentation today by Daniel Coons with Alaska Legal Services and Helen with ACH. I will hand off to them.
Okay. I'm not, there it is. Okay, can everyone see this slide?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm Helen with the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, and I'm just going to give you some data points on evictions and eviction filings in Anchorage and in Alaska. So working with evictions and trying to prevent evictions, as all of you know, from the homelessness prevention response system, is a part of the prevention part of the structure. So this keeps people from coming into our homeless management system and allows them to stay stably housed. So a quote by Matthew Desmond, who wrote Evicted and is kind of recognized as one of the eviction specialists in the United States, is that poverty is both a cause and a result of evictions. So after a family or a household is evicted, they have not only the past due rent, but also late fees, and are often charged with attorney fees and having to repay the plaintiff's court costs. So that just exponentially increases the amount of money that they owe. If they could have afforded that type of a bill, they would have paid their rent to begin with and not been evicted. So once that type of a debt load is over the household, things tend to spiral and availability of housing becomes even more difficult to access. So some of the things that households do in order to try to avoid being evicted, those that are living month to month and are going to be short on rent, is they might use credit cards. They might skip paying other bills. They might cut back on filling needed prescriptions or only take a partial dose of a prescription, which is not medically recommended. Some borrow money from family and friends, and most spend less on food. some of the impacts of being evicted on a household is an increased stress load and all of the negative things that can come from that. There are employment impacts. It's very difficult to hold down a job if you don't have a safe place to sleep at night. Kids often have to change schools, and this impacts not only their educational performance, but also their behavior, which can have spiraling negative impacts as well. It disrupts the receiving of mail. So if they are signed up for other social programs, or if they are getting notifications that they need to pay attention to, those pieces of mail do not always get to where they need to go. And it impacts access to voting. So people who aren't voting or can't vote are not able to elect representatives that represent themselves. And so policy decisions and funding decisions are being made by individuals that may not represent that population. And there are negative health consequences to being evicted. So now we'll talk a little bit about FEDs. That's a forcible entry and detainer. And that's legalese for eviction. So this is information on evictions filed in Alaska. And you can see pre-pandemic, there are about 2,400 evictions filed across Alaska in a year. In 2020, while the eviction moratorium was in place, there were still 1,600 evictions filed. And then in 2021, when the emergency rental assistance funds started being deployed, our number of eviction filings in the state decreased to about 1,000. I did a projection for the end of 2022 based on an average of the weekly filings so far this year, which puts us over the last 2 years, but not quite at the level of pre-pandemic eviction filings. The only problem with this projection is that eviction filings are not staying flat. They are trending up. So there have been 21 weeks so far in 2022. And these are the number of eviction filings in the Anchorage court each of those weeks. And you can see that the trend is definitely moving up. The trend line for the state of Alaska for all Alaskan FED filings also is trending up, although not quite as steeply as the Anchorage trend line is. And then when we look at all eviction filings across Alaska in 2022, so far this year through May 24th, which is the most recent data we have access to, you can see that almost 70% of eviction filings happen in Anchorage. Now, previous years' data shows that it's almost always over 60%, that Anchorage has over 60% of the eviction filings in the state, but Anchorage is definitely trending high this year. And then when you add Anchorage with the other major population centers in Alaska, you can see that they represent 94% of all evictions that are filed, and only 6% of eviction filings happen in our rural areas. And so now that I've given you some data points and talked a little bit about the state of eviction filings in our state and in Anchorage, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Coons with the Alaska Legal Services Corporation.
Hi, everybody, and thanks, Helen. I'm the Fair Housing Project Director at Alaska Legal Services Corporation. We're, for those of you who aren't familiar, we're a nonprofit law firm, and we provide free civil legal services to low-income Alaskans in a variety of areas, but certainly housing and eviction prevention and fair housing being among those areas we focus on. And just to kind of support what Helen was talking about anecdotally, I mean, we certainly did see a drop off in evictions in the last couple of years, 2020 and 2021, but it's definitely picked back up full speed now. And I'll so I don't forget, Sean, a great contact number for me is 907-222-4505. That's my direct number here, and that's if anyone would wants to call me about anything, feel free. So we certainly see these evictions taking place full speed ahead happening right now. And I mean, we're really seeing, I mean, there's three primary reasons that someone would end up getting evicted. One, non-payment of rent, which is certainly an issue now that the emergency rental assistance has been distributed statewide and is really, I think, pretty much exhausted and gone out to everybody. Non-payment is certainly an issue, and it certainly was before the pandemic. I mean, there was certainly a significant number of people who simply just couldn't afford their rent, and as a result would end up getting evicted eventually. Second, you'll see people who are alleged, at least, to have violated their lease in some way, whether that's some sort of behavioral thing, or maybe they're not paying their utilities, things like that. And then finally, what we're also seeing a lot of, and I would say even more so than before the pandemic, is we're seeing people whose leases are not being renewed. Their year-long lease term has been terminated, and the landlord chooses not to renew it, or they're on a month-to-month lease and the landlord chooses to terminate that month-to-month lease. And in Alaska, that can be done with no cause, no reason given. All that's necessary is that a landlord has to give a 30-day written notice saying, I don't want to renew your lease in the future. And given the current state of the housing market and how tight it is, that's become a real problem. I mean, even people who can't afford rent are having trouble finding new housing, whether that's affordable housing or housing whatsoever, period. And they're still losing their current housing, even though, you know, at least on paper, they've done nothing wrong and there's no reason for them to have their current lease terminated or not renewed. So again, that's just a big issue we're seeing these days. You know, I guess maybe more in closing, I would just talk a little bit about what we do at Legal Services in terms of our eviction prevention. We have kind of a statewide intake unit that takes in all the cases that come in and sorts them in their subject matter and geographic location so that it goes to the right attorney. One of the things we help with is eviction prevention. We provide advice. We provide kind of brief service, reaching out to landlords, seeing if we can negotiate move-outs times or prevent an eviction. And sometimes we represent people in court. And as far as I know, we're really the only organization in Alaska that does that. There, you know, you will very occasionally see a private landlord with a tenant in eviction court, and there really isn't anyone who sort of specializes in that area. So we're really kind of the only game in town. And so certainly if you are seeing people who are facing eviction, please feel free to send them our way. And in addition, I would just, since I work in fair housing, I always give a plug for fair housing issues. Fair housing is basically involves the laws that provide equal opportunity access to housing, the laws that make it illegal to discriminate against people based on a protected class like race, religion, national origin, disability. And certainly that's another area where we can engage in eviction prevention. Sometimes there are discrimination involved issues that are tied to an eviction. But in addition, I mean, that's an area where as people are moving out of being homeless and back into housing, I mean, they might face discriminatory reaction from the housing that they're applying to. So that's another area where we can potentially help. It's not just, we don't just have clients who come in and tell us this is what I'm seeing. This is how I've been discriminated against. I got a bad feeling about how this all went down. But we also do fair housing testing, where we have testers who we can send out in pairs to see how they're treated differently based on their protected class. So we have some resources for trying to uncover evidence that discrimination is taking place. So certainly if people are, if you have people, clients who are facing issues that they think are related to discrimination, that's another area where we could potentially help them besides just the eviction prevention, which is again another big part of what we do. So I think that's all I have in terms of off the top of my head to tell you, but feel free if you have any questions. I'd be happy to answer anything I can.
I invite anyone to feel free to unmute and ask any questions, or type them in the chat if you have any questions for Dan or for Helen. All right, well, thank you so much. Could you share the phone number again?
Certainly, I was just sort of trying to do that, and I think I screwed up. But no, there we go. I think I just had to turn it to everyone. All right, there.
There we go. I was saying I wasn't writing fast enough to get it down. But thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you so much for this presentation. Oh, Helen.
Yeah, it's Helen. Dan, could you also put in the statewide intake number?
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, Jessica, I'm done.
Not a problem. Thank you. All right, well, I don't see any questions now, but thank you so much. And if anyone has any questions they think of later, Dan did share his phone number there, and also the intake number. All right, next we have questions or comments from the chat box. I have not seen any yet, but if anyone had any general questions or comments that they wanted to share or ask, please feel free to put them in the chat box or unmute and ask. Not seeing any, and we did not have anyone sign up in advance. So I would invite anyone in attendance, if they had any good news or celebrations that they wanted to share, now is your opportunity. I know it's not necessarily my good news, but I was very excited to see pictures and postings last week from the groundbreaking for the new PSH project that Providence is breaking ground on in Midtown. That was very exciting to see, and I'm always so happy to see when we have new resources coming online, and I think that is going to be a much needed project for Anchorage. Susie. You're still muted, Susie, but I see your hand up.
Sorry, my mic wasn't
That's
on.
okay.
So I wanted to let everybody know that our Moving Forward program, which we anticipated ending June 30th, has actually been extended through December 31st. So we will be accepting clients through the coordinated entry, and that is for victims of domestic violence. So we're pretty excited about getting that extension.
That is wonderful news. All right, coming up in June, we have some advocacy opportunities. June 1st will be the monthly meeting of the Housing, Homelessness, and Neighborhood Development Commission, or the HAND Commission. They meet monthly on the first Wednesday of the month. You can participate via Teams, or you can attend in person down at the Muni offices on the corner of, well, in between 8th and 9th and L Street. And they're up on the 4th floor in the conference room up there, or again, via Teams, and that's from 4 to 5:30 on the 1st. There are 2 assembly meetings for June that are regularly scheduled meetings. The first one is June 7th, and the second one is June 21st. Those are held in person down at the assembly chambers at the LUSAC Library from 5 to 11 p.m. They are also broadcast via YouTube if you wanted to watch and participate that way. And the agenda and links to the recording are all located on the municipality website. We have a assembly committee on housing and homelessness meeting that is tentatively scheduled for the 3rd Wednesday of the month. The May meeting was just yesterday, so that will be in June. And I believe that has transitioned to only being an in-person meeting or via teleconference now. And that is also down at the LUSAC Library. And then June 23rd is our June meeting of this group, the Homeless Prevention and Response System Advisory Council, from 4 to 5 p.m. And the link for the Zoom is in there, and you can also email if you have any presentation requests or questions. All right, in closing, I just want to again thank everyone for coming, and thank you for everything that you do, and invite you to look at the website bethechange907.org for any upcoming volunteer opportunities that you might be interested in with organizations here in Anchorage. We are finishing up a bit early today, so get out there and enjoy some of that sunshine.